He worked with suicidal patients, and David Carreon will share what they taught him about life, hope, and how to flourish. God gave Moses a special blessing that we can reflect on as well, and Yoshishi Takahashi left behind his job and girlfriend to embark on a 6-month journey. And the reason is his waypoint into the Hall of Heroes, coming up on episode 67 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, David Carreon, author of the book, The Opposite of Depression. David, I'd like to start every conversation with the ascent. What is the biggest challenge you see men face today, and how do we overcome it?
It's a great question. And I think that in thinking a lot about it, I think the biggest single thing that men face is probably loneliness. Now, I wrestled with this question when preparing for this interview. There's a lot of things that I could have said, but I think that if we're talking about men specifically and things that are different in men than women, both men and women struggle with loneliness, but the drop off in the number of friendships that men have experienced is quite significantly more than women in the past 20 years, and that the consequence of loneliness for men is quite grave. So that, combined with other mental health concerns, is a major risk factor for things like suicide and other mental health challenges. So all that to say, I'd say that the loneliness and the disconnection that I think we're experiencing as men, I guess broadly speaking, is the top challenge.
Now, I've heard before, I've had other guests mention that. It's actually probably the number one thing I hear guys say. I'm interested, though, that you said in the last 20 years. So what has happened in the last 20 years where guys, we aren't just having as many relationships anymore? Or why are we more isolated?
So I think that's a great question. So just to look at the numbers, in 1990, according to the Survey Center on American Life, the number of men that had 10 or more friendships is 40% and dropped to 15% by 2021. And then number of men that had no close friends is only 3% in 1990, and it's at 15% in 2021. So a huge shift. And in these extremes, the people at the top who are the super connectors are now not being super connectors, or there's far fewer of them. And then the people who are at the bottom who have no connections are much bigger. This is the part that's harder to answer. A lot of the standard stories that I've heard about don't fully pan out. I think that there's been a cultural shift in the value of male friendship. I think that's the most likely story, but that's hard to get your fingers on. You know, the number of hours worked, or the, third spaces like, neutral meeting places, or, a lot of these stories are fine, but those didn't change that much over those 20, 30 years. So it's still something that I don't think anybody's got a really clean story on, but I think that the value and time put into relationships and the kinds of the ease of relationship. I mean, certainly for, I experience it as a man, the difficulty of making friendships with the difficulties of work and life and things like that is people still had families in 1990, I think, and people still had work in 1990, and people still had, you had cell phones, but like the cell phones really, is that making it go from a bunch of friendships to no friendship? That doesn't seem like that's going to be enough, big enough story. But I think that it's a shift away from relationships outside the home, that's become a trend or a emphasis when resources maybe seem limited. But again, I don't think that we've got a clean answer to that question yet.
Okay. Interesting. So let's jump into the book now. It's called The Opposite of Depression. What my work with suicidal patients has taught me about life, hope, and how to flourish. So I like how you talk in the beginning of the book. A lot of times I think people would say, well, I'm depressed, but with someone who works with it on a regular basis, you say we have to figure out, are we depressed or weary? So what's the difference?
Yeah. So depression is a mental illness, is a condition where you've been sort of the technical DSM framework, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, you've got a medical condition. It's gotten to a point where you are often unable to make changes to really get out of it, or at least the changes you could make are not really solving the problem. Weariness is many of the same symptoms, but maybe to a lesser degree. And that when a person, as I've described it, is weary, and I think there's a lot of people in the modern world that maybe don't have diagnosable depression, but really life is a lot harder than perhaps it should be, or that the difficulty of getting out of bed, doing your job, taking care of your family, all those things become ever more difficult. But the good news about weariness is that it's much more reversible. That with the standard kinds of advice, and some of the advice in the book that I give is like you can often work yourself, improve things, and your life gets better. Depression, that sometimes is true, but often you need assistance from a professional, and it's worth worth pursuing that direction.
So if someone is depressed now, and maybe they're thinking, I've never really had a chance to even figure out, diagnose, know what to do. You talk about the first steps for those who are depressed. So if someone's listening to this podcast right now and says, I think I might be, and it feels like it's more than weariness, well, what do you recommend that they do?
Well, I think the two main directions are to talk to somebody about it. Oftentimes, if you've never talked to any medical or mental health professional, that's a great way to kind of see from an outside perspective, how are you doing? And the other side is, try some of the advice, self-help advice, self-help books, things that you know would be good for your mental health, but aren't doing maybe. Give it a try. And that often is, if it's a, mild or moderate case of depression, maybe you can get yourself out of it with some of this advice. Are you doing things that, are you staying up late scrolling your phone? Are you not exercising? Are you eating bad? Try to change some of those things. And if, and so the two things are start to make changes that you could make or that you think you could make, and then also talk to somebody about it. It doesn't always have to start with a mental health professional. Talk to somebody, a friend or trusted counselor, maybe a pastor or a trusted mentor. Those are places to start.
So in the book, towards the beginning, you talk about emotions. And I think, especially with guys, sometimes there can be this negative, I don't want to have these emotions. Can emotions cause depression? And what is the correct way to deal with our emotions?
In a sense, emotions are a human capacity that do a number of things. So one of the things that emotions do is they help us it's a mode of seeing. When I'm interacting with somebody else and I feel anger, when I'm interacting with somebody else and I feel sadness, that's giving me information that's beyond just the first level. So sometimes we get a sense about somebody. Sometimes we're mad and we don't know why. Our brains and our bodies and our souls perhaps are integrating enormous amounts of information, and we're having these reactions that'll then help guide the conversation. And so in a sense, if our emotions are well tuned, if our emotions are in line with our highest values, if they're well trained, then we've got this amazing partner in our life that's able to integrate all this information that we can't consciously pay attention to in the midst of a conversation or work or our families. But if they're disordered, then they can cause problems. So, as a classic example, if your emotions are disordered because of stuff that happened in childhood, you were mistreated and have these beliefs about yourself, maybe you're feeling anger that has nothing to do with the conversation in front of you. You're feeling anger about something that happened to you before, or maybe you're feeling sadness that's out of proportion to your situation. Now those emotions are not a signal, but noise. Now they're not something that's helping you direct in the right course, but a distraction. So, and that's what we say. Perhaps you might have depression, that you have these disordered emotions, and classically with depression, it's sad or low or depressed mood. But often that also comes with anger that's out of proportion, or anxiety that's out of proportion. But all to say, can emotions cause depression? Yeah, in a sense they can. That depression is in some sort of crude sense too much sadness, but it really is too much sadness that goes down to almost every physiologic level. It starts to affect appetite. It affects your sleep. It affects your concentration. It affects your desire to be alive. Mm-hmm. And so but all that to say, yes, it's a place that depression can start, and it's a place that you can address. Addressing those emotions is a way to treat depression when they are the part that's disordered, the part of the total disorder.
So let's talk about this, your chapter on trauma, because I think it's been I think this is one of the kind of the good things of late, where people are now opening up more about, yes, it's okay to not be okay. And yeah, there's been some things in my past where, boy, I need to really work through that. So let's talk about trauma and how do we come out on the other side of it stronger?
Yeah, trauma, and in this word has been used in a lot of ways. It's actually, I mean, the history of the use of the word is pretty interesting in itself. You rewind, 50 or 100 years, and people don't use the word trauma. Means you got hit in the head or something, or you broke your arm. And so a trauma surgeon isn't somebody that goes in and talks about your childhood. It's so this the use of the word that like physical injury might also be a psychological injury, and that there is such a thing as a psychological injury, and that we frame it in that same sort of term. The metaphor shift is interesting in itself, but the idea that something difficult can happen in the recent past or the distant past, and then that can affect you for a long time, is something that is recognized, and I guess in some sense it's been recognized for a long time. We like to think we're the first to the party this last few decades, but there's been different frames and different ways to talk about it in the past too. But all to say, when you have something like that happen, the pathway for treatment, especially when it's severe, is talking about it. And talking about it is maybe a simplistic way. When a trauma occurs, there's sort of a cold part of the memory, like the events that happened. It was October the 7th of 1993 that this event occurred. And then, this happened and that happened. And that's sort of part of the memory. But the other part of the memory that's sort of stored with it is the emotions that were happening at the time. Perhaps fear, anger, whatever it was that happened at the time. And so people can recall that cold memory, but you can't actually change the memory unless it's hot. You can't change that memory unless you go back in time, in essence, to that moment, start to relive the experience and start to address what occurred. And using your best self, your tools, reason, and these different ideas of what actually occurred and what's its actual significance. And with all of these, trying to work out all of these distortions that might have been embedded in that moment that aren't really true about you, about your worth or about your value or who you are. But that's the fascinating thing. It's almost like you have to time travel back to that moment to really fix it. And so with standard psychotherapies that address trauma, you're doing that again and again and again and again until you get it right. It's almost like a video game where, one of these really hard levels where you keep dying in the video game and you got to try to level over again until you get it right. And once you've got it right, it's like it's done. It's fixed. And I think the resilience. I think there's been a lot of maybe, oh well, just get over it. And it's like, yeah, well, that there's plenty of things that you can get over, but then there are in fact some things that you can't just get over. And then what do you do about those? I think there's a lot of talk about, well, the body keeps the score, and trauma affects you for life, and that's true enough. But I think also the other side of it is that there's this incredible resilience that humans have, particularly when you start to unpack these things, and you start to respond to them appropriately. And I think that's also, and some of the these stories of recoveries that I've seen is it's incredible to see people who have been struggling with this thing for a long time figure it out, and then are able to move forward. You think about some of the worst events that have ever occurred in history, and you can just and seeing, wow, look at, and so on the one side, look at all these long-term consequences from, the one example is the Holocaust. Nearly, everybody ended up, with PTSD after experiencing Auschwitz. But the interesting thing was not everybody had long-term PTSD. Mostly everybody did. That's fair. But that there's a pathway out, or there's some people that are able to be resilient even against possibly literal worst human horror of the last century. And some people are able to find a way of escape, or granted grace, or whatever it is, to not have a diagnosis of PTSD after Auschwitz. But that's a we don't have that fully figured out. But for anybody that's experienced trauma, there are many that are able to get out of the trauma and the difficulty.
So in the chapter about attention, you say that humans have a truly remarkable ability, concentration. And boy, talk about a time when everything is fighting for our concentration. So how do we make sure that we're concentrating on the right things?
Yeah, this is just a really fascinating capacity. I mean, the ability to attend to something, we just take for granted. It's the water we swim in, but there might not be that much of the world that is conscious. That if you think about all of the galaxies and all of the stars and all of the planets, we're maybe this UAP stuff is real, but like as far as we're sure about, like humans and maybe some small number of animals are conscious. And so that's, the amount of spotlight on the universe is tiny. And with this spotlight of what I'm looking at and, sure, physically looking at, but also what am I thinking about is this very rare phenomenon in the created order. And so with that attention, it also is the thing that we're able to, when we think about being able to make changes, it's almost like when you focus on something, that's the part of, and like I was saying with trauma, when you focus on your past, your attention goes back in time, you focus on this event that occurred in your past, and you're able to make changes to that thing in the past. You look at the present, you look at the behavior, you look at, you look to Christ, you look at your a bill, you look at a worry, and you're able to then look at either a value or a vice or something else, and sort of you're telling the story based on where you're looking. And in a sense that there's a sense in which your attention is the only real choice you have. Where you're looking, where you're pointing your eyes, metaphorically and literally, might be it for human identity, human capacity. My stomach is going to do what my stomach does. I really don't have direct control over that. Do I look at the donut or do I look at the I don't even know what a healthy thing for breakfast is. Is a critical decision. And I can look at both and then say, hey, think back to, hey, well, I would like to be healthy. And so I'm not going to eat the donut right now. I would like to, so what is my vision for my future self? What is my vision for my past worth? What is my vision for, so your attention can go to all these different places, and the habits of attention you have, when you look at something repeatedly, that then lays down tracks that are easier to pay attention to in the future. And sometimes not even tracks that are easier to pay attention to in the future. It might literally be physical changes. So, if you continue to focus on physical fitness, the circumference of your arm is going to change as you lift weights. So there's physical consequences to where you place your attention. It's also true in the brain. Certain parts of the brain get bigger or smaller based on where you place your attention. And so there's, it's one of the classic study of people who are cabbies in London versus bus drivers in London. If you're a cabbie in London, you have to it's like you're on the knowledge. You have to study an incredible amount and memorize all of the circuitous medieval streets of London if you're going to be, accepted to this high position of cabbie in London. And you're really using the navigational part of your brain. If you're a bus driver, you drive in a circle, and it's fine. It's a good job. It's an important thing for people to do. But the cabbies have a bigger part of the brain that's related to navigation. It beefs up because they use it. They use it like crazy. And so, so too with a lot of things in the brain, we've been able to detect various areas of actual, basically hypertrophy. It's not literally hypertrophy, but a larger part of the brain for when you dedicate to certain tasks. And so too with anything, whether it's, a virtuous thing or prayer or any other habit that people are thinking about, you can develop those muscles, as it were. And that has consequences, whether it's, arm circumference or whether it's your, hippocampal volume and the region that's involved in navigation. These things, there's physical consequences to where you place your attention.
Just talking about the brain again, I don't know if you're blown away by this. You see it every single day, but just talking with you right now, I'm just thinking, you just look at how much, you know about the brain, and it just seems like we're scratching the surface, that there's just this beautiful thing that God has created that we'll probably never know the extent of it.
Yeah, no, it's so complicated. It's so complicated and beautiful and delightful, and we are just scratching the surface. And so I remember asking, there's a Christian neuroscientist, was a resident, maybe a medical student at the time, but I was in this class, and I remember he was one of the top guys, and he had worked out a particular pathway where motion is detected. He figured out that this particular column of neurons is able to figure out leftward motion, or incredibly meticulous work for years and years. And I said, how much of the brain do you think we understand, just percentage wise? It's that's a dumb question. What do you mean? But he didn't say that. He said, thought about it for a while. It's less than 1%.
Wow.
No. Far less than 1%. So yeah, I think that we're, what I do during the day is we take brain scans and we focus. We take 20 minutes of 3D blood flow information from an MRI scanner, and we use that to target magnetic stimulation to within a few millimeters of where we want to go. So we're starting to have like some really incredible breakthroughs in treating depression or a variety of other conditions using these techniques. But like, it's just the very beginnings of what might be possible if we actually understood this organ that's, between our ears. To our previous question, in Matthew, Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? And I think that has to do with a lot of things, but this idea that there's something almost singular or like universal. There's all these extreme things that Jesus says about, but like the eye being a lamp. And if there's light here, then hey, you're good. That's it. You win. But yeah, if your eye is perfect, if what you're seeing is perfect, then you're perfect. It's like, wow, but like, how do you get that? I mean, that's okay. Well, that's sanctification, that's salvation, and that's, maybe the resurrection, but like, you can't really get there in this lifetime, perhaps, but maybe you can. Maybe there's ways in which you can learn and grow and change in some of these ways. But all that to say, we're barely starting to understand the brain, but that we have some understanding is significant, and that we're already starting to use that in psychiatry, but also on an everyday basis. The idea that you could change your brain. I think there's a lot of messages out there, and this is on the short list of things that is a major problem for men that I said wasn't the number one problem, but I think that this is because both men and women have this message. You're just a consequence of you had a bad childhood, so sorry, you're kind of stuck. It's like, well, yeah, you did, but you can rewire parts of the brain that were miswired or that you got a bad start with. And I think the flexibility, or what we sometimes call the neuroplasticity of the brain, is one of the major insights of the last half century. And starting to understand that and believe that we can change. And that some of the standard stuff that we do, whether it be discipleship or psychotherapy, is able to say, hey, yeah, you did have, you did get a bum hand at the beginning, but if you make these changes, if you practice in this particular way, you can really get out of a lot of stuff.
I think that goes right into what I was going to ask you next too. There's a chapter talking about the power of hope and how do we have more of it?
Yeah, hope is a powerful thing. And, one of the treatments that we offer at my practice in California is called Hope TMS, because, for a lot of people who've tried, in our case, it's people who've tried like 5 antidepressants, been depressed for years and years, like the chance that medication, antidepressant number 6 is going to work is pretty low. And, so trying to give people hope in this sort of medical framework, but also the idea that there is something coming in the future. Things are going to be different. And so, from there's a theological sense in which that's true. If you really believe that Jesus is returning and that we're going to be resurrected and that this body of sin and death is going to be done away with, and we're going to have resurrection bodies, and we're going to be like the stars or something like that, like whatever, man, like whatever's happening here, it's fine because that's coming. Like I can, you can endure anything for a short amount of time, and okay, maybe a short amount of time to 80 years, but having that as a conviction really changes things. And so too, like, and even in a, less complete sense, science is advancing every day. Yeah, you tried this thing with depression, but this next thing is coming. I mean, we're actually making it, for the first time in my career, we're actually making progress in psychiatry. It's not just stalled out on dumb new medications that do the same thing as the last one did. So like, maybe next year we will come up with something that's different. Whereas, I don't know, in 2001, it wasn't very likely. All it to say, I think that having a story or having a narrative that helps draw us out of the present darkness is critical, whether that be a spiritual darkness or whether that be a biological psychiatric darkness, and that being able to see a light at the end of the tunnel or the city on the hill that's that we're not yet to is a critical part of helping us to flourish with the difficulties we have to face every day.
All right, one last question for you. You end the book with a chapter talking about blessedness. So define what blessedness is and how do we get to that point?
The story that was just extremely compelling was about Mabel, this woman who was just in this just terribly miserable physical state of, near death, blind for years, no friends, all these things that I describe as good ideas for your mental health. She had none of those things. Yet she focused on Jesus, and she focused on this hope of resurrection. She focused on how gracious Jesus was to forgive her sins, and just singing these old songs constantly in her head. And she was able to transcend the physical limitations that she had, despite having just been in the absolute most miserable physical state. She was able to transcend it. She was able to bring that hope for the future, that love of Christ, that blessedness. Sometimes it's translated happiness. And we say, oh, it's more complicated than that. But in her case, it kind of wasn't. Like, she was actually pretty good mood, despite the fact that she was actually in this physical misery. Now, like, physically speaking, pain and all these other things. But that as much as this perhaps secular advice or good wisdom is helpful for improving things a little bit, there is this state that people can achieve, seem to have been able to achieve, that are able to fully transcend all of the physical stuff that we deal with in really profound ways. And I think that on a spiritual level, that is a way that makes my book irrelevant. If you're able to actually experience Christ in this way, that the practical advice is sure good, but that there's a more excellent way than practical advice.
Now, looking at the Bible, Numbers 6, verses 22 through 27. This might sound familiar to you. It's kind of become a popular thing lately. It's the priestly blessing. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons to bless the people of Israel with this special blessing. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Whenever Aaron and his sons bless the people of Israel in my name, I myself will bless them." So you've read that before. I'm sure you sang the song at church, the blessing. Warren M. Marcus says this about the context of the blessing: that the children of Israel had little understanding concerning the God who led them out of Egypt. As they crossed the Red Sea, they didn't understand that the Hebrews enslaved by Egypt who are now free were Abraham's physical descendants. Think about this. So the Old Testament hadn't been written yet. Moses was about to receive the first 5 books, the Torah, from the one true God of Israel on Mount Sinai. They had just gotten through 10 plagues unleashed on Pharaoh and Egypt for not letting them go. They saw God part the Red Sea and held back the Egyptian army with a pillar of fire from heaven. They walked on dry ground as God made a pathway between the 2 walls of raging water. And when they got to the other side, they watched as God caused the water to come crashing down on the Egyptian army, pursuing them with a vengeance. Yet, while Moses was meeting with God on Mount Sinai, receiving his word, they had Aaron build a golden calf and began worshiping this Egyptian idol. And it was to this rebellious, imperfect people, the children of Israel, that the one true God gave this priestly prayer of the blessing for them to experience his reality in a personal and powerful way. So here's the good news for you and for me. This prayer of blessing isn't based on how good or perfect we are. The children of Israel definitely weren't deserving of this, and let's be honest, neither are we. But this supernatural prayer was so powerful that it caused Israel to experience supernatural favor and blessing from God for 40 years as they wandered in the wilderness. Now, the version I read was a little different, but you may know the line from the song and from some translations that it will say, "The Lord bless you and keep you." So I just want to leave you with a thought about what keep means in Hebrew, the Hebrew word, and this is my blessing to you today too. So the Hebrew word for keep is shamar, which means guard, observe, give heed, have charge of, keep watch and ward, protect and watchman. So my prayer and hope for you today, my blessing for you, is that God's word would watch over you and keep you, and that his word would act as a watchman over your heart. May God keep you and preserve you, and may he order your footsteps and guide your path. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Yoshishi Takahashi, who in 2008, amidst the hustle and bustle of modern life, he made a decision that would alter the course of his future. Leaving behind the comforts of his job and the warmth of his girlfriend's embrace, he embarked on a journey unlike any other. A journey across the length and breadth of Japan, with a singular purpose in mind: Armed with little more than a GPS device and a heart full of determination, Yoshishi set out to weave a tale of love across the vast canvas of his homeland. With each step, he etched his message into the fabric of the earth, traversing a staggering distance of 7,163 kilometers. Through bustling cities and serene countryside, he walked, he drove, he rode, and he sailed, all while driven by a singular vision. Upon his return, Yoshishi unveiled his masterpiece, a digital declaration of love, immortalized on Google Maps. Because the GPS data of his journey that lasted 6 months spelled out these words: "Marry me." It was not just a proposal, it was a testament to his creativity, his dedication, and his unwavering commitment to love. But his journey didn't end there. His grand gesture captured the world's attention, earning him a place in the halls of history, a Guinness World Record for the largest GPS drawing ever created. So because amidst the digital landscape of modern technology, Yoshishi's proposal stood as a beacon of hope and romance, and a reminder that true love knows no bounds. He is officially in the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. Even if your dad wasn't perfect, I hope there's a moment where you look back and you think, this is the moment I knew he loved me. Maybe there's a story, maybe there's a moment, there's something that you'd like to share with other guys, encouraging them in their own fatherhood journey, or maybe just reminding them that there's something that we can glean from every dad, because dad stories are the best. With Father's Month coming up very soon, I would love for you to share your favorite dad story. All you have to do for it to have a chance to be on the podcast is go to manlywithandy.com and share your favorite dad story on the microphone of manliness. You'll see it when you go there at manlywithandy.com. In a world dominated by things, Paul Louis Metzger shares how we must work hard to account for one another's personhood. God helped Moses when he was dealing with burnout, and it's a reminder how he can help you too. And Dale Irby's wardrobe mistake turned into a 40-year joke, and it's his thread into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up next week on Manly with Andy. Manly with Andy is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.